Good day. The German Foreign Ministry has confirmed that Germany has rejected a request from the French government to suspend work on the Nord Stream 2 pipeline, made in response to the detention and imprisonment of the Russian dissident leader Alexei Navalny. This makes it almost a foregone conclusion that this pipeline will now be completed. In a sense, this is unsurprising. The German political and business elite, especially the business elite, have been wholeheartedly committed to the completion of the pipeline. Only the German Green Party, which is historically anti-Russian and skeptical of projects of this nature, has been opposed. The economic realities are that Germany needs Russian gas as it negotiates a complex transition from coal and nuclear power towards the new technologies, wind farms and solar energy and the rest, which it hopes will be its non-carbon energy future. As it happens, Europe overall has actually increased imports of Russian gas over the last year. This includes, by the way, France, and it includes even countries like the Baltic states, such as Lithuania, which have been importing liquefied natural gas through a gas terminal at Klaipėda, which Lithuania built in the expectation that it would be receiving liquefied gas, natural gas, from the United States. The reason for this is that the unusual economic problems caused by the pandemic and the cold winter in Europe this year have pushed up demand for gas, and Russia is the only country with the depth of resources and the proximity to be able to satisfy that demand. This decision by Germany to reject French requests that it suspend work on Nord Stream 2, in fact, is consistent with an overall shift in the balance of power, the economic balance of power, between Germany and Russia, and indeed a shift in the balance of power between Germany and Russia in other areas also. When Vladimir Putin became president of Russia in the year 2000, Russia was very obviously the junior partner. At that time, it was anxious to develop relations with the European Union. In fact, there were even ideas at that time, endorsed by Putin, of Russia one day itself joining the European Union. Since then, and especially since the Ukrainian crisis of 2014, Russia's economy has grown and developed to the point that it is no longer so dependent on the West, and the Russian economy today is not only far more resilient and far more advanced than in some respects it previously was, but is also now unquestionably bigger than Germany's. In my opinion, that has been true for some time, but even World Bank and IMF statistics now finally concede that in purchasing power parity terms, it has become unquestionably so. This shift in power can be seen in various metrics, but perhaps a simple way of looking at it would be to consider what has happened to the Russian economy and to compare it with the German and larger European economies over the last year. As we know, in 2020, the pandemic took place, and at the start of the year, oil prices crashed. There were widespread expectations of a severe recession in Russia, as has been true in other countries, of a rise in unemployment, and of major pressure on the Russian budget. In fact, the Russian economy has sailed through these problems surprisingly well. There has been an economic contraction, but at 3%, it is less than Germany's 5% and significantly less than the much larger contractions we have seen across Europe. It is even less than the similar contraction which we have seen in the United States. Moreover, and perhaps surprisingly, Russian reserves, financial reserves, have increased. Russia's foreign currency reserves now stand at around $600 billion. There are changes up, sometimes it's slightly more, sometimes it's slightly less than that figure, but this depends very much on the state of exchange rates. And importantly, Russia's domestic reserves, its so-called National Welfare Fund, has actually grown to around $200 billion. This is important because it is that welfare fund from which the Russian government intends to spend money on its ambitious infrastructure program, which is supposed to power forward the Russian economy over the next 10 years. In addition, and perhaps most surprisingly of all, Russia ended 2020 with a budget surplus. This is despite the fact that there was a significant fall in oil prices and an obvious increase in budget spending, as Russia, like other countries, had to spend more to cover the problems of the pandemic. Partly, this is a result of a limited recovery in oil prices that took place over the course of 2020 and which became rather more pronounced at the start of this year. But principally, it's the result of the Russian government's own lessening dependence on oil prices. Starting from 2008, the Russian government, in fact, has pursued a systematic policy of diversifying the economy away from energy, emphasizing the industrial and service and manufacturing sectors of the economy. There's been an ambitious import substitution program, for example, and a very successful policy of expanding agriculture and increasing food security. And these policies have started to pay off, with the result that the budget can now overcome temporary falls in oil prices. I would add that another feature of Russian economic policy in 2020 is that most unusually, the Russian government covered its extra spending not by dipping into its reserves or by borrowing on external financial markets, but by borrowing in the internal Russian market, which for the first time has matured to the point that it is able to provide loans to the Russian government to cover temporary deficits. This points to the growing depth and resilience of the Russian financial system, which has been completely transformed since Vladimir Putin became president, and which is now finally starting to function like a financial system in a developed state. Lastly, it must be said that the Russian government has pursued once more prudent monetary and fiscal policies. It has not engaged in QE or anything like that. The Russians have an intense aversion to that kind of approach, to that kind of monetary program. and their fiscal support to the economy over the course of 2020 was far more modest than what we see in most Western countries. This has paid dividends in terms of a smaller deficit, budget deficit, than we have seen in Western countries, but it has also meant that it has also shown the underlying resilience of the economy, as shown by the fact that unemployment has only marginally increased, and the overall economic contraction at 3% has been relatively small, despite the absence of this huge monetary and fiscal support which we see in the West. In fact, at his speech in Davos, Vladimir Putin actually criticized these measures of monetary and fiscal support that are taking place in the West, pointing out that they are becoming, over time, less and less effective and have, in his words, exhausted themselves. So Russia is far less vulnerable to the kind of economic pressures that the West can apply upon it, and the Germans have noticed this fact, which is one reason why they are now becoming resistant themselves to calls for more sanctions against Russia. They have realized that these sanctions do not work. In fact, they achieve the opposite outcome of the one expected. They strengthen the Russian economy and put greater pressure on the German and European ones. This shift in power is now also demonstrated by a surprising new development. Russia has, as the Russians themselves never fail to remind us, unveiled an ambitious and extensive program of medication to combat the pandemic. They produced a variety of medications, but the best known is the one which the Russians call Sputnik V. The European Union, by contrast, including Germany, has botched its pandemic response and has become immersed in an ugly and pointless quarrel with the British on this subject. It seems that the Germans are now finally accepting that without the prospect of domestically produced medications becoming available, coming on stream in any short time, and with problems in importing these medications from countries like Britain, they may have to turn to Russia and import those medications the Russians have produced into Germany and across Europe. This is something which the European and German authorities have resisted doing. Indeed, they heavily criticized the Hungarian government for doing precisely that thing. But realities, economic and health realities, have obliged them to do it, or at least to consider doing it. If it finally happens, nothing will emphasize more clearly the fact that Russia has in effect detached itself from the West and is forging forward on its own terms. In fact, the reverse of what was the case is true now. It is not Russia which is any longer dependent on Germany and the European Union, and which must therefore seek their favour. On the contrary, it is Germany and the European Union which are starting to become more dependent on Russia as it re-emerges as the economic colossus of the European continent. Thank you very much for joining me on this programme. Please look me up on our other channels, the main channel, the Duran, and also my colleague and friends Alex Christophorou's channel. You'll find links under this video. Please also support us by finding us on our other platforms, BitChute, Odyssey, Library, Rumble, and the rest. Please also support us through Patreon, Subscribestar, and PayPal, and also via Bitcoin. And last but not least, please come to our shop, buy yourself the amazing things you will find there, the great t-shirts, long-sleeved and short-sleeved, our amazing hats, our hoodies, our sweatshirts, and of course, our famous magic mugs. I look forward to seeing you in my next program, and thank you for joining me today.